All right, traders, welcome to Friday's recap. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and this is your day and weekly recap. Again, I like to do these videos on Friday just as kind of a quick summary. Obviously, we'll go over today's price action, a little bit of strategy, a little bit of a look ahead for next week, but I'll just say right off the bat, these weeks are usually pretty tough to get through. With all of the names that are reporting, this was the busiest week for S&P for earnings. I think there was well over 100. I think it was around 140 companies reported it just in the S&P. Forget about Nasdaq. So really a busy week that we had this week. And usually again by the time you get to the end of these weeks, I'm always a bit tired because obviously I'm running a trading room, trading my own portfolio, and making sure that we don't miss any moves, trying to catch them all, right? And a couple of these days are really difficult. We also did last night. If you're watching this video and you're not a member of Tribeca Trade Group, because this is a public video, we did we do a chart forum for members once a week. We did that last night, and we actually talked about a couple different other concepts. We talked about the VIX activity that we've been seeing in options, and it looked like one of the orders was they sold and took profits yesterday. Nice little order. I think they made about $1.5 million in VIX. We talked about the whole Beyond Meat movement and what's going on there, and not a lot. No shares basically able to be shorted. So we went through, and what we do is members bring any charts that they want to go over, and we break them down using the value area indicator that we use on multiple time frames. So we always find some good trades. When we do this, it's a really nice exercise. I bring on one of my colleagues, and Webb, who is the writer of the indicator. So really nice to kind of go back and forth with him and talk about what he's seeing, as well as the technicals and the indices and some names. But we really found a couple different areas of the market that looked pretty intriguing for next week. And I think he tweeted out a couple of those things too. But so anyway, if you're not a member of Tribeca Trade Group, I don't advertise everything that we do, but I'll go through a couple examples of some of the trades that we looked at today, but there's a lot more, I think, than that I post to Twitter and so forth, because I'm busy making sure that members are seeing all the best setups, and on Slack, right? So we have a private Twitter feed that you can see right in front of you, but most of what we're doing is in Slack. I think that's the best platform right now to stay, completely up to date and so forth. So that's that. If you've never checked this out before, if you want to know more about the indicator or what we do with the chart forum webinar, feel free to email me, cfromhertz@gmail.com or tribecatradegroup.com, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions about membership and about how our team works together, right? I view all of the members and so forth as team members, and wow, a bunch of them really caught some big trades. TTD was a huge trade that a couple of members caught. Netflix was another one that people were buying on the lows, and really did a good job with that one. And then of course we set these things up in the morning in terms of trades that I have my eye on and so forth. So let's go into. Why don't we go into the indices first? S&P made a 52-week high. This has been kind of a stay with it type market. There's a lot of things. It's a very noisy tape in terms of headlines. We've been dealing with headlines all year long. I feel like it's been more than a year, but it just seems like more headlines than usual this year. I don't know. I've been trading for a long time, but it just seems like that's the case for me. But I think it's been really one of these markets where you just kind of stay with the trend, and just be mindful of taking off risk when you've got a couple key events like we have next week. We've got a pretty full week next week. Not only do we have the FOMC next week, but we have this face-to-face meeting with with China and the U.S. to talk about a possible or trade deal or get more constructive on a trade deal, something to that effect. We also have for members, we've got our meetup, so trader meetup for Tribeca Trade Group on Thursday. We reserved a really nice place right on the water in New York City for next week for Thursday, so that's open to all members. So that's going to be a fun event. So that's Thursday night. So by then, well, hopefully we'll be through FOMC and through the China meeting. That's, I think it's a 2-day meeting that's going on, and again, many more earnings reports next week. So yeah, I mean, S&P new high. I think it's funny because even I said, I think in last night's chart forum member video, that we needed to kind of break through, make sure that we're making 52-week highs. We didn't want to see one of these stalls and kind of return back. But 52-week high now, not an official closing high for Nasdaq futures. There was an intraday high a couple days ago, but anyway, that's fine. So again, these two kind of continue to look very similar, Nasdaq and S&P, but there's not much to really complain about with this market. We continue to kind of check back very naturally into support. Buyers come back in. I think what's also very impressive is, look at the shake and bake this IWM gave yesterday. Almost retraced a very good portion of the activity from Wednesday, and then we're right back to where we are again. So man, is this IWM tricky? I'll tell you what I did with this thing. Right, I caught this move. I said, hey, I think something's really going to happen here in IWM in terms of this thing has a good chance of getting going, and I got long here. I took 2 targets in some calls that I went out a couple months in IWM. I took them off yesterday, the last, the remaining position that I had on, after taking 2 targets. And good thing I did, by the way, because I would have been very upset if I didn't. But anyway, that's the way you have to operate with options, because they fluctuate so much that if you don't, and you have a back and forth day like this, you could actually, the price, the cost basis could go right back, right, to where you were, or even worse. But look at what happened today, up another 1.2% today. And if you look at the biggest component in the small caps, the regional banks, which we did see some call buying. It's funny because option activity can be a little bit confusing at times, because in the end sometimes they are right, but in the beginning sometimes they're wrong. For example, I think they bought KRE calls yesterday right at the high of the day, so they were underwater in that position, and today it looks like they're probably back to at least back to because we closed higher, probably a little bit above their cost basis. But keep in mind, a lot of times that, and we talked about this in last night's chart forum webinar, is that sometimes my first trade, and what I normally do with options, is I scale in, because sometimes my first entry, or sometimes when we see that call activity on the tape, you could get in for sometimes 50% cheaper, because just the timing, the way the timing works, sometimes much cheaper. And again, not every option trade that we see in the tape works. In fact, a lot of them don't work, and I always try to make sure that I mention that, because there's a lot that don't work. So moving on, but I think this is definitely interesting, right? I think the banks right here probably have is one of the most interested places that I am right now, because this group is I would say very underowned. I think a lot of people threw in the towel, and if you start to look at the weekly charts, like for Goldman. Right. If you remember Goldman, when they reported earnings, they had good trading results. They're just inside value. So I've talked about this chart a couple of times. If you've watched a couple of my videos, I talked about Goldman, but they are now in value for the week. So I think you've got some decent upside in this one. To try to work with, and of course it's not going to go in a straight line, but I think we've got could be an 80% chance once we've established ourselves in value, you've got an 80% chance that you can go all the way through. So I think this is firmly established ourselves inside value. So of course it's not going to be nothing, works as a straight line, but I like this setup, and you don't have to worry about earnings at this point, right? Because we've got so many names that are reporting next week. So wanted to spend a little bit of time on that. If we go ahead and we look at the overall performance for the week, regional banks were the best performer for the week. Also, kind of a mix of, I think, more risk on sectors. Semiconductors, of course, killed it. Our member weekend video that we put out, I mentioned two areas of relative strength that I was seeing going into the week. One was semiconductors, and we highlighted names like Lam Research, Micron, AMD, Kemet, KEM. These were all on our watch list that we sent out to members. I usually have about 15 names, 15, that I put together. So I'm very pleased at saying that there is relative strength, and that was right on the best performing list of groups this week. Banks, again, you got both the regional banks and the all banks ETF, which is KBE. FANG stocks, what a week for the FANG stocks this week with the heavy hitters reporting this week: Facebook, Amazon, Google, and then of course a couple other ones like Twitter. But the internet names moved really well. I was on Bloomberg 2 weeks ago talking about a trade idea. I think so far that one's in good shape. Making 52-week highs is the internet ETF, even though not every name did well in the group. Amazon, fell a bit today and really didn't do much. It seems like sometimes, even though you could debate whether or not Amazon had a great quarter, I think they had a pretty good quarter. But it usually takes a few days if the name drops on day one. PayPal, ServiceNow, just a couple examples. I would imagine a couple of these names are going to recover, especially ServiceNow. But sometimes it just takes 3 days. It takes a few days. Netflix. So again, even though Netflix is in this too, of course Netflix did recover. Had a bounce, real nice bounce, and was up 2.9% today. But that I think is going to be coming back into resistance, right into this range, which I think is going to be tough. But again, overall for the group, very strong, and a lot of that Google. Let's just see what this looks like. Might as well just go through a couple of these names. This is kind of tough, right? We've taken out a couple of these version point of controls. This has been a tough chart, I think, all year long. So that's Google. I don't have anything much to say on this thing, even if we have the weekly chart, because it's just too not choppy, but it seems like we're moving back to that range again. I actually like Twitter here. I think Twitter has a chance to continue to work itself higher, kind of a cup and handle look to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little bit of continuation next week in Twitter, or even because we do have this version point of control up here at 43.77. So that could be a great place to kind of think about where this could get to. Keep in mind, a whole quarter, right? I mean, this is the last time it reported, and it basically chopped around for 3 months between $40 to 35. I mean, that's tough. That's really tough price range that Twitter has been moving. So maybe this thing will actually start to do something besides the earnings moves, which was huge, which was 9%. So let's go through a couple other sectors, because it really starts to get interesting when you start to look at the sectors. Sorry, that's my spreadsheet for putting together this table here. But IGV Software, this is another group. I mean, this team was phenomenal today, recovery, and this opened up. This initial move last night was lower to flat, and this thing took off. TTD, mentioned some traders in the room had this one. I'll tell you, I was in a trade a couple weeks ago, and I got out of it and I was doing like, patting myself in the back for getting into this thing somewhere in here and taking profits up here and saying, oh, I missed this little pullback. Really nice. And what's even more stunning about this move is there's been 2 or 3 broker downgrades in TTD. So pretty amazing for that to take place like that. But if you stick with this group, right? So first of all, IGV, I think looks wonderful, breaking out of this congestion here. A couple times where it looked like it had a chance to maybe break a little bit lower, but that 20-day moving average, again, that's why I have these things on my charts, really giving a nice clue as to the trend not really breaking, just price testing it a couple times. But new 52-week high for the software group. And if you look at names like, I could go through a whole bunch of them, but this JCOM looks interesting, right? That's breaking out. Vive is another one that I think is a nice setup here. This was a trade that we had talked about a couple days ago on a dip. It just seems to do very well on a dip. But ZS, which is a little bit different group, but Zscaler, 52-week highs for this one. Not TTD. I'm thinking of Cyber. Sorry. Cyber also touched a 52-week high as well, after this base. So these are a couple names that I'm still long. Also, SE is another name that has done very well. A lot of these I'm long stock. I'm long stock in SE. I'm long stock in ZS. I'm long stock in Cyber. It's just been a little bit easier for me. These are positions that I want to stay in. And I get a little bit nervous after I've been in an option position for a couple weeks and it's made some money, and sometimes I want to grab the profits. I can personally, and everybody's different, but I seem like I can stay in the stock positions longer. It's just a lot easier for me to manage. We also do quite a bit of what's called rolling options. Like I did that in Home Depot this week, right? So Home Depot gave me a nice gain a couple different times. I've been playing Home Depot, and what I do is I generally take the profits and roll them out like to another month and to another strike further up. Kind of just helps me take some money off the table psychologically, and then have you still have a portion of the position on, but I feel like rolling out and up really kind of helps me in my trading. But again, software very strong, and if you're having a difficult time like trying to figure out what name in software, I think nothing wrong with owning the ETF. The only problem is it's a little bit high priced, but I think still worthwhile of taking a look at. Transport still did well. Industrials were up 1.3% for the week as well. And remember last week what was the best performing sector? It was gold miners. They actually took off the week a little bit. Were they on the negative list? Doesn't look like they were, so maybe they had kind of a flattish week, the gold miners. But remember, they were up 6%. What's interesting here is the energy names continue to move down. They were also on the worst performing list last week. They were down, I think, around 7%. A couple of these ETFs, and they're down again. So I had a couple of traders asking me about energy names. I just think we're in a tougher environment, because sometimes you want to play these things just like the regional banks. I think, and I've been saying this now for a while, that bounces in these energy names probably are a good place to establish a short, because they're just not getting above any, getting out of the downtrend, I should say. So that's kind of what I think for this group. I literally don't want any exposure to it. I tried a CVX trade a couple weeks ago for a swing trade and like literally stopped myself out of it. And look at this thing. It tried again. This was here when I tried this, and it failed right away. It came back and held the 20-day moving average, but it had a bearish engulfing yesterday, and then it moved down pretty decently today. So they're just too hard. I don't think it's worth it. So for me, if they happen to go up, I won't be in them. Solar actually took the week off too. That's where I've actually liked to be in. I would rather be in solar names. I think this looks pretty good. We'll have to see if it gets back above the 20 period moving average as well as the top of value. Then I'll be looking at solar. Keep in mind the biggest name in the group reports in the ETF reports next week for solar. I think you also get what ENPH, which we've been seeing some call buying in as well. All right, is that the name? Is that the name I'm thinking of? ENPH. I believe so, but maybe yeah, I think it was. I think it's ENPH. Sorry, been a long week. Also, utilities kind of look. Some of the defensives look a little weak. Well, actually, XLP was fine, but I was going to go to XLU. XLU has kind of been very much chopping around here, so I think this will be an interesting one to week. This will be an interesting one to watch for next week. Keep in mind, I think things like gold, bonds, the U.S. dollar. U.S. dollar was really strong this week. This also broke out to 52-week highs. This is the UUP ETF, so very strong in the U.S. dollar. So these are going to be things to watch. And we had a couple days where everything kind of goes the same way: gold, equities, and bonds. So it's tough because you can't really be diversified and say, "Hey, I'm going to be in gold and I'll be fine if equities goes down." That hasn't really been the case as of late. Recently, they've been kind of moving in tandem, and I think because there's a relationship there between, you know, quantitative easing and no quantitative easing, right? It seems like when they talk about when these Fed speakers talk about quantitative easing, gold goes up as well as equities go up. So there's, I think a definite relationship there. All right, so a couple names from today that I was looking at. I'll just give you, I don't mind because it's Friday, give you a quick glimpse at some of the option activity that we've got in our option channel in Slack. Disney. This was a name that I got long this week. Not a huge position, but it worked very well. A little bit of a dip in here. I kind of sat with this in here for a couple days and then took profits the last 2 days. I'm out of my Disney trade, by the way, today. So nice, and it's nice to see option activity once you're already in a name. That's always my goal, is to get in before the aggressive call activity that we see on the tape. So much better than have to chase. People don't talk about that, but a lot of times when you see option activity on the tape, the name is already up 2% on the day, or up decently. VIX, we continue to see some positioning. This was a big order. This was a little bit different than what we saw. We saw some August calls earlier in the week, and then they unwound some of those calls. We did also see some September calls. So, the VIX is all the way down to 12 right now. So, my thought on this is it's not bad buying a little bit of protection right now, being that it's cheap, or just reducing your exposure. What did I do? I reduced a lot of my exposure, as I said, pre-market. I always try to say what's on my mind and what I'm going to be doing for the day. You could see, for example, and I even had to force some trades, but a lot of exits, exit, 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 exit. I only took one new trade here, which you could see. Really nice. I think this lows, which we saw some call activity in. So again, calls go up when the stock's up 1.2%. So sometimes, again, when I have a similar type of pattern, I'd leg into a name if it's up 1.2% or 1.5%, and we see calls, because sometimes the very next day, just like I was talking about KRE, you can often get into to cheaper. But I like this coming into support, and we'll see if it bounces and moves out. Sorry. Other names that we saw option activity in today. Let me just move up the list a bit. A lot of things. So that was Lowe's. A couple other ones. SE, I already mentioned. We saw more calls in that one today. So IWM saw some calls at the end of the day, which I think is pretty notable, is that somebody's looking for this to continue to move up. If we look at just the relationship between IWM and SPY, You could see that it's kind of bottomed out here a little bit. It'll be very interesting if this IWM starts to outperform SPY. So again, we'll be keeping an eye on that relationship next week. And then there was also some put buying in ASHR. There's a decent amount of contracts, very far out of the money, going for like 20 cents, 30 cents. They're doing this, 22 cents, 23 cents. I would think because of that face-to-face meeting, that's the Shanghai ETF. So again, maybe some cheap protection just going out a week in case that meeting falls apart and they leave with nothing accomplished. Perhaps Shanghai sells off a little bit. So that's a trade idea. Option trades that went up in the last 20 minutes of the day. All right, guys, so we'll leave it there. A really nice day. I would say just final thoughts is, if you did fairly well this week, or if you hit a home run, congratulations to you. But if you hung in there and did okay this week, these weeks again, I say I think we were pleasantly surprised by some of the earnings reports this week. Earnings trades I think have been fairly difficult for me this go around for earnings season. So I've been trying to kind of sit on the sidelines. I think there's a lot of names that have been, it's pretty random, right? I mean, some names did very well, some names a little bit poor. But there's certainly been some money to be made if you went long, names like Google or even Starbucks and so forth. So it's been a very interesting quarter so far. So we'll leave it here. If you have any questions about Tribeca Trade Group, feel free to email me. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you guys on Monday.